Hi everyone, and welcome to today's CTC webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that again this video is going to be recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the question panel in the chat there to propose a question. And if I'm covering it and I see the question, I'll go ahead and answer it. Otherwise, I will leave time for at the end to go over those questions. And again, thanks for joining. And this webinar is going to be covering Revit groups versus nested families. When this topic first came up, I will say that this was kind of came up from one of my last webinars I did about Revit groups versus links. And after that webinar, this was the #1 requested webinar was Revit groups versus nested families, and just families in general. So that's what we're going to be covering, is just talking about kind of the workflows for each one, some of the pros and cons, things that are popped up with doing one over the other, and kind of some workflow tips. And again, if you have any things in the question or want to propose something that we can talk about during the webinar if we have time, go ahead and propose something and we can cover that a little bit later, again, if it's relevant to what we're covering at this time. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So with this, the webinar will explain again the differences of groups and nested families. I'm going to cover how they impact one another in the different techniques and different processing. We'll cover the impact of performance, but also file size, view and model in the regards of just that performance that's required there. Because there's some base differences between them and some of the things that we would recommend depending on your discipline and depending on what you're trying to get accomplished. You might want to choose one over the other. And that's where we're going to get into, is just kind of talking about those. And again, I want to, toward the end, I want to kind of leave it open. If you have any other recommendations, feel free to propose those. Okay, now actually before we get started, I saw some pop up about it's cutting off for the voice and internet. So just wanted to see if anyone else is having that issue or not. If you're not having that issue, if you propose a question about is it cutting off, check your internet. Hopefully it works. Again, this will be recorded, so you might be able to watch it afterward when it gets posted to the YouTube channel. But so far, from what I'm seeing, other people are doing okay. So I do apologize if it is cutting out for some people. Again, going over the web, you might have run into those issues. But as so far, everything seems good. But again, we could be posting to the YouTube channel afterward, and you can watch it there. So thanks for the feedback of, again, most of the people saying it's working okay. So I'm glad that that's going. So let's go ahead and get into the rest of this here. So the main problem that I want to talk about with this webinar here is just trying to decide which one do you want to use. Do you want to use groups, or do you want to create a nested family? What are the processes to do that? So it can take some time to go over these. Like, which one do I want to do? Do I want to do a group in this particular project? Is it going to benefit, or should I do a nested family? If I do a nested family, what is going to be required to get that going? And what I want to get out of it. So it can, again, impact the performance, the model, the time it takes to do some edits. We're going to talk about all that. So we're going to cover these kind of things here. And again, we'll get into like the breakdowns of each of these, like the groups and nested families. We'll kind of break it down a little bit. But we're going to talk about the groups first and just talk about some of the things there that you would have to go about doing. Again, I'm going to be kind of just keeping that portion kind of a little short. If you do have some other things about groups, I have my previous webinar. It is on our YouTube channel about groups versus links, and I cover a lot about groups there. So then we're going to talk about the nested families and some of the issues that might come up or the pros are there. And then dealing with scheduling for both of the options. And then also talk about editing. I'm going to combine that editing into kind of both of these, the top two as well, so we can get all that covered. So let's go ahead and get into Revit, and I will show you some of the things that I've kind of put together that can help distinguish what we want. So the first thing I wanted to show is groups. And in a Revit file, anything that you grab, you can create groups off of. So many of you are probably aware that, you know, if I wanted to create a group of some objects, I can definitely come in here and just grab a bunch of objects. Like I'm going to grab this workstation layout and then come up and say create a group. And then I can, you know, give this a name. I'm going to call this office desk layout, whatever you want to call it. So now with this group being created, I can always come in here and you know, do whatever I want with it. I'm going to go ahead and copy it around. I'm going to get rid of what I already have here, and I'm going to just copy this group over here to this office. Now, some of the things with groups that have been kind of mentioned over the years, kind of been one of the workflows, the recommendation things. It's been always recommended that you don't mirror groups. Mirroring groups used to be a pain, because if you mirrored a group, if I came in here, like I'm going to delete this one here, if I selected this group, used the mirror command and picked the wall, it mirrors the group just fine. However, sometimes during that process of mirroring groups or editing groups, there have been times in the past that editing a group, making changes, moving things, putting more things in there, has been known to have some issues. So I do want you to be aware that those issues still can come up. However, I will say preparing for the webinar and kind of going in through support, troubleshooting type of thing, you know, it's kind of changed a little bit over the years. You used to have some major issues with mirroring groups regardless of what was in the group. But over the time, you have seen some improvements that have been made that now when I mirror a group, if it's simply just this, where, you know, just I have a desk layout, some chairs in here, mirroring that has not been a problem. I've been able to edit the groups, make changes, and do those sort of things without getting any issues. Some of the big things that have always popped up was you would get the fixed group error. And when you're making a change, you get a fixed group error. You hit fixed group, it will ungroup the original, the group that you had selected, and will create a brand new group, you know, basically being the same thing, but just kind of fixing the potential issues that it had. Now, that can still pop up depending on the condition of what your group is. But if it's simply just layouts like this, you know, workstation layouts, like I have a workstation layout here, if you're creating some of the basic plumbing groups or electrical groups, those sort of things, if it's not hosted elements, there has not been too much of an issue lately with mirroring groups. If you have hosted elements, doors, windows, wall-based mechanical panels, or those sort of things, or outlets, mirroring those can potentially cause a problem. And mainly also if it doesn't find a host, if you mirror it and the host is not quite there, it's a different type of host. I've seen in electrical, I have an outlet placed on one type of wall, and I grab that group and I copy it, mirror it over to another area that has a slightly different wall type. It has been known to remove that outlet from that group. And so I've seen some of those things of just hosting elements in a group, mirroring, can have those problems. But if you're just placing some workstation layouts, or some in the plumbing industry, maybe some of the water closets, if you're not maybe really connecting too much of the pipes, those can be mirrored. But as soon as you start connecting pipes in the plumbing though that might cause some issues, start to mirror a group around because of the connections in there. So in most of those, you wouldn't necessarily need to be mirroring unless the pipe goes one direction always. You need a mirror to go the other direction. But usually the main portion of the group for the plumbing is just going to be to that fitting, and then the fitting is going to control whether it goes, what direction it goes. So with that plumbing, just do the main portion of the assembly there, not necessarily where the connection goes up and down, left, right. So some of the things continue with the groups, and then we'll get into some of the other things, is that when creating a group and you have all these elements in here, one of the things that is a benefit with groups is that I can come into the group and I can make it change to a particular type of family. I want to change it out to a certain type of chair. So I come into the group editor, I change out the chair, finish the group, and that now updates to all the other groups that are in the project. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to finish up with placing these around here. So I'm going to delete some of these just standalone stuff here. And then I'm going to copy this group around. I'm going to mirror this and mirror it again. So I'm just kind of going through and placing these objects within the group editor here so that, or not the group editor, but the mirror to get the normal groups here. And again, if I make a change to this one group, it's going to affect it throughout the project, anywhere it's placed. And another benefit to make it pretty easy of editing is that if I want a different layout, let's say I want a different chair layout or anything, here I have this office desk layout. And if I want to make a change, I can simply say edit type and duplicate the group. And I'm going to call this something else. I'll just call it 2. And now that makes a separate group. So now if I go into this group and I make a change to these elements, I'm going to make these this type of chair, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Let's see if I have a different size here. I'm going to make it a little smaller, actually, just because that's all I have in here. I'm going to put another one in here. So I'm going to copy that over. I see here I got to move my stuff down because I put it in the thing, the wall there. So you got a group inside a wall. So that could be another thing. It's just you can, it's allowed since it's Revit in general. So I'm going to get rid of some of these extra chairs, move this wherever I want. And again, it was just the simplicity of being able to edit this group, make a change to this one, and duplicate it to make another group. It's as simple as just edit type, duplicate, go into that one group and make the updates. The other benefits of groups is if I have something in a group like these 2 chairs here, but maybe in this one office there's only supposed to be 1 chair. But I want the rest to update if I have, all the rest of it would be the same, but just this one office cannot have a chair. Let me go up here and see if I think there was one, I had a column in the way, but I guess that was maybe on the other side. But I could just tab to that chair and do the exclude group member, and that will remove that chair from that group without actually getting rid of it. So if I wanted to later, I can select this group and say restore, and it brings it back. Or I can, again, tab to it. I'm going to exclude it, and then if I exclude it, then I can tab to it again and say restore. So it's just a simplicity of being able to edit elements, exclude, edit, put some more stuff in there, duplicate it. So in the regards of groups, they have that benefit of being able to quickly change something and place it around the model, edit one, change the others, exclude from certain ones if you don't need something. And with that exclude, they're actually, I mentioned this in my last webinar, but I'll cover in this one as well, is that when I tab to something in a group and right-click, there is that Move to Project option, which will move this element to the project. It will exclude it from the group, so if I hover over the group, it's still got excluded. But now this object is now placed directly in the model, not part of the group. So in reality, if I select the group and restore it, it puts it back. It doesn't delete this extra element. So if you're doing the move to project, you have to be aware that if you restore it, now you have duplicate elements in that room. So those are some of the benefits, the workflow with groups. Again, some of the limitation is you got to be careful with mirroring groups and copying the group around depending on if it's a hosted objects. If host objects or hosted objects are in a group, most of the time we're going to recommend that the host be in the group as well. So if I have wall cabinets, doors, panel boards, any of those sort of things, I want to have that group with the host in it as much as possible. Without having the host in there, you can cause issues down the road when you go to place that group. If it can't find the host, it's going to exclude it. So then you have to go through the work of putting that element back and restoring those elements so that they're there. This can cause issues in scheduling. You go to schedule how many cabinets you have, and you're missing 20. So you would definitely want to make sure you go through and be cautious about what is in a group, if it's a host element or not host elements. As much as possible, non-hosted elements are better because they don't have that issue of they just randomly will disappear when the host is not there. Okay, so let's now get into the other option of nested families and some of the things here. So in this project, I have the nested family scenario, where in the other project I had groups and I had placed that group all over the project. But in this project, I have nested families. And this family here, I'm going to go ahead and open this one just to show you what it looks like, is in this family, I have a very similar workstation layout as I had in the group project. So just to show with the group project, so I have the layout and has the workstations there. Whereas in my nested family, these are all nested families in this main family. So I have all these workstations, the partitions, the chairs, everything in this one family is all brought in from another family. And I have now placed that several times around the project. So every single one of these are that nested family. Again, I can come in here and copy this around as many times as I need as well. So no difference between the groups and nested families there. However, with this particular family, what I also did was I created some parameters for it that I can come in and change. So I have a 4 workstation and a 2 workstation. And I've already pre-built those. So if I just come over here and say 2 workstation, it flips, and now all you see is the 2 workstation, not the 4. So I've turned off the other families over here. Now with that, if I grab this family and I mirror it, I can pick anything here and mirror it, move it around, copy, rotate, without any issue, because again, it's nested family. So it doesn't have that same thing of, a mirror, potentially if a mirror it going to cause an issue because it's a family itself. So it's part of the family. Mirroring a family, it has not caused any issues that I'm aware of. Now, what's nice about the nested family scenario is I can come in and make some changes to those families. However, if I need to update a family, some of the things to be aware of is depending on the type of nested family you create, there are some workflow things that you might have to do to achieve this. If I go into this particular family, again, every single one of these is the nested. So if I select this, I can edit that family, make some changes to this. So this is just the single shelf family here, or the countertop. And if I want to make the updates, then I have to load it back into the other family. So I can say load into project, and I would have to go grab that family, load it in, update it. So now the family's been updated into here. And then once I finish here, then I load this family back into the project. No, I don't want to save that because I already made the changes. So it updates in the project. Now I could go directly to the source family. I can open up that family, edit that nested element, save it. But then if I wanted to update, I have to go into this family to update it. Because if I just bring that family into the project, it's not going to replace the family that's nested. So you have to be aware of that. But with that being said, if I take a family, a nested family scenario, in this case, in my workstations, this family here, if I wanted to do something where I want it to be able to change in a project, if I bring it in, but also if you want to schedule these components. Because currently, right now, if I was to create a furniture schedule, I would be able to schedule the main family, and that's it. So I would be able to schedule the workstation layout here. So I would be scheduling this. But if I want each of those individual objects to be scheduled, what you would have to do, let me go make sure what view I'm in here. What you would need to do is if I wanted to schedule each of those elements, then each of the nested families would have to be a shared family. So I'm going to grab this here and edit. And in every single family you open, there is an option to make it shared. If this is shared and I bring it into this family, I'm going to bring it into the nested the workstation layout. I'm going to override it. And then I'm going to load the whole family here into my project. And now with it being a shared family, what that would do is now make that individual element schedulable. So if I create a furniture schedule, and I'm just going to come in here and grab the family and type. So I have a ton of the workstation layouts, but there is my shared nested family. So let me come in here and uncheck the itemize every instance. I want to group those together. So I have here's the rectangle family. I'm going to put in the count so I can see what's there. So there are 25 of this workstation, 3 of this one, but there are 212 of the rectangle with bracket. Now this bracket that's also in here, in this schedule, just a hardware bracket, there are 424. And the reason why that is there is because inside this family, the workstation, there are this family. So this is a separate family as well. And inside that family, it is a shared family. So it has that shared checked. So then when in a schedule, it appears as a secondary line item. So if I wanted to remove that, I'd have to have some filtering mechanism to remove it because otherwise it is scheduled because it's shared. If I choose not to make this shared, I'd have to go all the way back to this family and make it not shared. However, with that, there is a limitation that if I'm going to uncheck the shared and load it into project, and I'm going to load it back into the workstation, the work surface, because that's where the family originated. And then Revit's going to say you cannot load a non-shared version of the family because there's already a shared one loaded. So the small limitation here is that, okay, I have this bracket in here, it's shared, and if I try to make it not shared and load it in, it's not going to let me. So the workaround is that you would actually have to make that family something else. So I'd have to come into this family here and save it as another family that's not shared. So I'm going to say that, for example, I'm just putting here not shared. And then I'm going to load that into my work surface. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this one bracket and I'm going to switch it out to the not shared. So they're basically the same, it's just this one is shared, this one is not shared because I give it a different name. So I'm going to load that into my workstation layout to update that version. And then I'm going to load into back into the project, replace it. And again, now over here, we got this option of override the subcomponents. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then in my schedule, I'm going to see that number of the workstations go down. So now we only have 212 because there's one bracket per work surface. So shared nested families, shared nested subfamilies, you have that limit, that thing where you have to constantly be aware if it's a shared family or not. Now, with it being shared, the benefit of the shared nested family is that I can edit the family directly from the project. If I tab to any of these families here, these are just the regular families, they're not shared. I can tab to them and still edit because they are nested, but I can also edit these directly in the project. So if I go into the project browser and go down to furniture systems, there's that bracket. I can make a change directly to the bracket here, make another type, make something, and then have the element change, materials or change names. I have that flexibility of because it's a separate line item in the project, so it adds that family into the project. Now, with the concepts of the groups and nested families, to finalize some of the performance things, I did some basic testing with this, and again, over the time, Autodesk has made some improvements into the graphic performance and those sort of things in just overall general. So some of the stuff that we have seen over time have been kind of changed a little bit in regards of, do you recommend one over the other? Well, one of the things that is just it's a small thing recently is I have up here on the screen, I have here's my groups project and here's my nested families project. And all I did was I created these projects exactly the same. I loaded the same content in and grouped one and did nested family of the other. And I purged out as much as I could to make it a little bit different. And I'm seeing here in this particular project, the 13 megabyte file, and the nested family is 11 megabytes. So almost a two megabyte difference there between them. So with the nested family concept, you may have a decrease in file size because now instead of it thinking about a per instant placed object, it's only a nested, a single family, and Revit doesn't add that much of a file size regardless of how many you have of that one family placed. But groups can increase the file size depending on how many groups you have placed, but also how many groups in general of different configurations you have placed. If you do the different configuration of a group, if you edit type duplicate, that's now like a separate nested family. So it's now different. It would be if I was to take a nested family, duplicate it, make a different configuration, load it in. This in file size would increase because now there's two families looking different. So groups have that thing too. So now this is not a terrible amount, but this is kind of a small project, so it's not a full good representation. But in bigger projects over time, more groups can cause bigger file size because just how many groups are in there. Also depends on what is in those groups. If it's walls and doors and windows, the different level of data within that file can increase. Performance-wise, same as I was saying earlier, that Autodesk has been making a ton of improvements in just Revit in general. That in the past, when I wanted to do a webinar before on this, it was always that groups would cause more of a performance issue within the Revit file just for processing. I had an apartment building with a ton of group layouts, and that caused a ton of slowdowns. Whereas when I started breaking it down to not have the groups and also doing some nested families. It didn't seem to be as bad with the groups, but now with newer versions and updates and better computer performance, as I was preparing for this, I didn't notice that much of a huge difference between groups and nested families in 18 and 19. 17 and under. 16 was one that I know that there was still some problems with some groups, but again, those were updated with some hot fixes and service packs, so some of that was taken care of. So as we touched on with some of this, the scheduling things, if you do groups, so to continue on with their finish up with the scheduling, the outline, scheduling is if they are groups, everything in that group is going to schedule. It's a family in the project. Revit's going to schedule it because it's placed. It is there. Nested families, you will have to make the nested families be shared in order to make them schedulable. If you're just wanting the main overall family to be scheduled, then all the nesteds will not be shared, and then you would have the schedulability of it. Also, again, the editing of the families or the groups versus projects. Editing reasons, I have a feeling, or I feel that groups are much easier to edit. You go into a group, you in a project, you edit, you make a change, you save it, it's update right away. However, when you go a nested family route, editing those nested families, you have to open the family, then you have to open the nested family to make a change to that. Now, if you make them all shared and you bring them all across, then you can edit the values once it's in a project, but you have to have that all be shared. So now you're going to be not doubling your file size, but you're going to be adding more families to the project that you didn't have to if they're not shared. So if they're not shared, you add to a project, you're not adding a ton of other families. You're just adding that one. But if you make them shared, now you're adding more families to the project, which can increase the file size just because of the amount of families that are in there. Not going to be a huge amount, as I saw showed you on the File Explorer there. The file size was not that big between the two, and in the groups, it had all the families that were basically the nested, so it didn't add a ton. It was just mainly the group data. And looking at some of the questions here, one good question that came up is, I understand you can schedule groups as a whole now, and can you add project parameters? Yes, that's actually another good point is yes, in a group scenario, in newer versions of Revit, I want to say I think it's 18 with an update, and 19 is I can go and add a parameter to groups. So I'm going to come in here and go down to groups. Oh, sorry, it's actually model groups. And then you can schedule groups based on these parameters that you add to them. So you can actually do that. You know, create a parameter to the group, schedule groups themselves, and then you should be able to tag that because it's part of the group. Okay, so as I'm finish up here, we'll go ahead and if you have any questions, go ahead and propose them. But as hopefully this has kind of informed you of some of the things that you might have to look into when you're trying to decide whether you want to make a nested family, or groups. Again, they do both have their pros and cons. Deciding which one is beneficial to what you're doing is going to be important. With editing purposes, kind of performance purposes. If your users are not fully aware that it's a group or nested families, if it's nested families, they may not know that because they're just placing it and they don't know necessarily that it's a nested family. So they're like, oh, I want to make a different one. You know, they might have that request that, hey, I need another one. Whereas in a group scenario, they can just edit group, duplicate, make those changes. But the other benefit of nested families is you just have the the control of here's something that's already laid out always this way. So you group those things together. And then if you have scenarios like in multidiscipline stuff, I talked to my coworkers on the MEP side. Some of the plumbing assemblies, they can do nested families for mechanical and mechanical equipment. If you have multiple things that need to go into one element, nested families is a good idea. But if it's like an assembly within a project, that would be more of a group versus nested families. So you do have some of the pros and cons there.